Chapter 184. He wasn't him, but her. Even Shui Yaoyao's fingers were trembling. Her pupils shook, and she murmured, "Your Highness Zhou." Fu Zhou didn't panic at all. Instead, she smiled at Shui Yaoyao and walked to her. She took out a piece of tissue and wiped her scalded fingers. Her thin lips were pale, but her voice was still smiling. "Next time you play games, you have to take care of your fingers. Don't forget, we still need to dominate the gaming contest." Shui Yaoyao really didn't know what to say. Such a handsome and carefree person really didn't look like a normal girl. If she hadn't seen that scene just now, even if there was a little blood on His Highness Zhou, she wouldn't have thought that way. She wouldn't even dare to guess that Fu Zhou was a girl. Fu Zhou reached out and tucked Shui Yaoyao's messy black hair behind her ear. She said in a low voice, "Can you keep this a secret for me?" Shui Yaoyao looked up and saw the young man looking down at her. His side profile was still handsome and gentle, but probably because she wasn't feeling well, the silver hair in front of her forehead was already wet with sweat, revealing a sickly paleness. Even her eyes had lost their vitality, but they were still very bright, so bright that it made people's hearts palpitate. Shui Yaoyao nodded hard. She looked behind Fu Zhou, took off her school jacket, and handed it to Fu Zhou. Seeing that the young man was still looking at her, Shui Yaoyao lowered her voice. "Wrap this around your waist, and no one will be able to tell. I'll hold your jacket for you." "Thank you." Fu Zhou smiled, but the corners of her mouth were still a little pale. She tied the sleeves of her school uniform around her waist, making her legs look even more slender, making her look even more handsome and devilish. Shui Yaoyao looked at her face. "I put painkillers in the classroom, as well as heat packs, and I'll go get them for you." "No need." Fu Zhou grabbed her arm and looked behind her. "It's not peaceful in the classroom." Shui Yaoyao saw the scene just now, and of course she knew who the culprit was. "It's all my fault. If it weren't for me, His Highness Zhou wouldn't have become enemies with Lu Zhongming." "It's not because of you." Fu Zhou smiled, her lips turning whiter and whiter. "They're here for me. I've been paid to get rid of this disaster." Shui Yaoyao was even more shocked. "His Highness Zhou means that they were ordered by someone. A young boy in puberty couldn't swallow his anger and wanted to teach me a lesson. Plus, he didn't have a good heart." At this point, Fu Zhou's eyes turned cold. "You always played dirty tricks. That's why you came up with such a plan to ambush me at school." "His afternoon class." Shui Yaoyao turned. "I've already asked for the afternoon class." Fu Zhou pressed her hand on her belly and smiled wickedly and dangerously. "Of course, it's not because of them. When I'm better, I'll deal with them slowly." Xt Yaoyao looked at Fu's. "And she?" Fu Highness Shui. For a long time, she had enjoyed too much of His Highness Zhou's gentleness. The only thing she could do to repay His Highness Zhou was to choose silence when it was time to be silent. However, there was one thing that she had to confirm first in order to ensure that she would not expose herself. Chapter 185. Fu Zhou laughed. "If he knew about this, he would kill me. The Almighty doesn't like to interact with girls." Shui Yaoyao finally understood why the young man used to look at boys in a weird way. Everyone said he was gay, but he wasn't. He was supposed to like boys. But His Highness Zhou was different. Shui Yaoyao didn't know how to describe that feeling. It was like she had a new soul. But if young Master Qin didn't know now, she was worried that His Highness Zhou would be in danger when he found out. After all, the Qin family was too powerful in Jiang City. Almighty Qin didn't like to be cheated. Everyone in Jiang City knew this. His Highness Zhou was too bold. Shui Yaoyao thought about it. What about the time you changed on the court? I wasn't discovered. The Almighty is a neat freak. Fujio curled up her lips, which was very beautiful. I blew into his ear, and he almost stuffed me into the trash can. Shui Yao Yao, was a man's ear supposed to be blown? So His Highness Zhou not only knew how to flirt with girls, but also Almighty Qin, Shui Yao Yao, who had a new understanding of Fujio, glanced at the young man beside her. At this time, the young man had recovered some energy. He walked forward with a smile, and no one could tell that he was wearing the school uniform to cover his awkward position. It only made him look cooler and more handsome. Shui Yao Yao couldn't help but wonder what kind of man could subdue a girl like His Highness Zhou. Inexplicably, a noble figure appeared in Shui Yao Yao's mind. If it was Almighty Qin, that would be very interesting. Fujio didn't know what Shui Yao Yao was imagining. She only knew that Shui Yao Yao was smiling happily. She raised her eyebrows. What's wrong? Nothing. It was better not to tell His Highness Zhou about this. After all, it was just her imagination. The after effect of her period was that Fujio slept the entire afternoon at home. After school, Chen Xiaodong pushed the door open several times, but all he saw was the bulging quilt in the bedroom and the young man's exposed silver hair. Even he didn't know what happened to Fujio. He just thought that his young master was too tired from playing games. On the other side, Lu Zongming's knee was still hurting, and he was even limping when he walked. The people around him were all badly battered. Ming, how are we going to explain this to young Master Fu? We can't possibly say that we didn't even beat that perverted trash. Can I still get paid that way? Lu Zongming was infuriated. Use your brain and think about it. If this gets out, how are we going to show our faces in number 1 middle school? Isn't it embarrassing? Then what do you think we should say? That person was also anxious. This matter was more than embarrassing. If the girls knew about it, they would laugh to death. Lu Zongming narrowed his eyes. Then, he took out his phone from his pocket and called Fu Ximing. After Fu Ximing saw the call, the corners of his mouth curled up with a hint of pride. Is it done? Chapter 187. Qi Nemo didn't care who was looking at him. He turned sideways, took off the black glove on his right hand, and put his palm on Fujio's forehead. When the cold touch hit her, Fujio moved back a little, but she didn't wake up. She just shrunk her handsome face even more. Her silver hair was still sticking out, and she still looked noble. Qi Mo's eyes darkened, and he pressed the quilt down again. Secretary Liang was very confused. Since when did their CEO learn to take care of people like this? There was no problem with the temperature, and the surface of the body was normal, so it wasn't a cold or a fever. It was probably because of the intense studying recently, and the young man's physical strength couldn't take it. He was still growing, and some things didn't need to be perfect. Thinking of this, Qi Nemo took his hand back. He tore up the fill-in-the-blanks that he had prepared for the young man today and threw them into the trash can. Although full marks were important, his little brother didn't need full marks. He could afford it anyway, as long as he didn't embarrass him too much. It was the first time Secretary Liang saw their CEO Qin tear up a piece of paper, and he couldn't help but be curious about what it was. Qi Nemo glanced at him at this moment. His eyes were extremely cold. It made Secretary Liang's thoughts go back to normal. Qi Nemo didn't say anything. His handsome face was as cold as ever, and his eyes were on Chen Xiaodong. Take good care of your young master. Yes. Chen Xiaodong really couldn't tell what he was feeling. From the moment Almighty Qin appeared, he felt like the world was a fantasy. Young Master Qin, he wouldn't really turn gay for his young master, right? Secretary Liang had the same feeling as Chen Xiaodong. For CEO Qin, who had an international conference in a while, what could be more important than business? But CEO Qin still came in person, and he stayed for more than 20 minutes. The young man was sleeping, and the CEO was watching. That scene, it was as if he and that little housekeeper of the Fu family didn't exist. Should he tell Madam and boss about this? It was such a difficult choice. Why did the CEO have to like him, the useless young master of the Fu family? Fu Jiu was sleeping soundly, and she didn't know so many things had happened that night. She didn't know what it was like for other people to have their period, and she hated it the most. On one hand, it was the natural enemy of a cross-dressing woman. On the other hand, apart from the pain, she also wanted to sleep. The next day was still very uncomfortable. Fu Jiu continued to ask for leave. She didn't even leave the bedroom, and she even locked the door from the inside, just to get rid of some blood evidence. It was not until dusk that she regained her energy and prepared a bowl of hot soup to drink. Chen Xiaodong stopped her sternly. "Young master, tell me the truth. You and young master Qin, are you two already together? What do you think?" Fu Jiu didn't answer him directly. Instead, she put her hands in her pockets and smiled. "It's time to test your intelligence. Think about it carefully." Chen Xiaodong, why did he feel that the young master was treating him like a toy? How could he be so casual? Chapter 188. When Fu Jiu heard this, she suddenly froze. Temperature measurement. Did Almighty Qin give me a thermometer? No, young Master Qin just touched your forehead, Chen Xiaodong said. Fu Jiu raised her eyebrows and laughed. So it was just my forehead. It's because he's touching his forehead that's weird, okay? Young Master Qin's secretary was dumbfounded. Chen Xiaodong was still nagging, "Young master, do you know how complicated my feelings are right now? I'm happy for you, but I'm also worried for myself. How am I going to tell Madam that you and young Master Qin are together? No one can accept this, okay?" Fu Jiu listened to him indifferently. When he was almost done, she crooked her finger at Chen Xiaodong. Seeing this, Chen Xiaodong leaned over. Fu Jiu reached out and patted his face. Xiaodong, your IQ is directly proportional to your height. You keep having such unrealistic dreams all day long. Be careful, Almighty Qin might find out about your thoughts and chop you up into dumplings, human meat filling." Chen Xiaodong was a bit confused at first, but after a while, he realized that his young master not only attacked his IQ, but also his height. Young Master Qin just told him to take good care of his young master. Young Master Qin didn't need to be taken care of. He was either flirting with girls, or on his way to flirt with girls, or he was bad-mouthing him. Moreover, he even thought that the way he talked just now was very handsome. He was hopeless. After rehydrating, Fu Jiu slept in bed for the whole night. It wasn't until the day of the monthly exam that she put on the school uniform that had been washed a long time ago. She wore a black mask on her face, but she didn't go skateboarding. Jiang City was always foggy in the morning after winter. One could vaguely hear the sound of students playing, and the smell of pancakes permeated the air. Fu Jiu purposely came early today. She had half a steaming hot jianbing in her mouth. She didn't enter the school and just stood at the entrance of the alley near the school gate. Her goal was clear. She would find whoever took the lead that day. Lu Zongming, who was on the phone with his head down, didn't realize the danger at all. By the time he reacted, he had already been forcefully pulled into the alley at the side. Lu Zongming paused after seeing the young man's face, and he wanted to curse. Fu Jiu didn't waste time talking to him. She kicked him, and it almost took Lu Zongming's life. This time, the strength was different from before. This time, Fu Jiu used all her strength. Lu Zongming rolled on the ground in pain. But Fu Jiu was not moved at all. She looked indifferent. Lu Zongming had never seen this in a high school student. But in the next second, the youngster laughed again. His long legs stepped on the metal box beside him and he lowered his eyes. Haven't you always wanted to beat me up? Fight back. Fu Jiu. Today is our monthly test. You can't hit people. Be careful, or the teacher will cancel your qualification for the monthly test. Lu Zongming was so scared that he even threatened Qin Feng. Fu Jiu just looked at him with a smile. It's 7:40 in the morning, and the visibility here is extremely low. I'm wearing a mask. Even if you get beaten half to death later, who can prove that I did it? Just based on your own words. In fact, Qin Mo's analysis wasn't wrong. People like Fu Jiu had the characteristics of criminals. This was because she had already formed this action pattern long ago. She wanted to avoid all eyes and continue her hunt. Lu Zongming didn't dare to refuse. He realized that when Fu Jiu was angry, there was a natural coldness that made people afraid. Even though he was smiling, his eyes were as dark as the night, empty and full of hostility. Lu Zongming's hands were trembling as he placed the phone in Fu Jiu's palm. Don't talk about this nonsense. If you can't do it well, then you can't do it well. Young Master Fu, really, I'm not trying to shirk responsibility. This gay is really hard to deal with. Lu Zongming was still desperately trying to explain. Unfortunately, the proud and arrogant Fu Ximing didn't want to listen to him at all. Fu Ximing didn't expect that after he spent so much money to teach Fu Jiu a lesson, in the end, it was the other party who called him. To Fu Ximing, this was simply a harsh slap in the face. The burning sensation and anger on his face didn't subside even after he sat back in his seat. At the same time, the students from No. 1 middle school had already entered the exam hall one after another. It wasn't until he saw Fu Jiu in the back row that he realized that there was a handsome guy there. Alright, all of you remember your exam area number. The invigilator raised his hand and looked at his wrist. There's only 1 minute left before the exam. Those who have mistaken the exam venue, please find your seat as soon as possible. We'll hand out the exam papers in 1 minute. The first test was English. As a hacker, English was her specialty. In addition, Fu Jiu had been active on Fifth Avenue before, so she knew more than just English. The exam time was less than 2 hours, and Fu Jiu finished it in an hour. She was the first one to hand in her test paper. The invigilator didn't say anything after seeing the young man put the test paper on the table. Chapter 192. The other people who mocked Fu Jiu had the same thought. They looked at each other, laughed mockingly, and then lowered their heads to continue with their papers. Since there was still a lot of time left, the invigilator had nothing to do, so he simply picked up the only test paper on the podium and started reading. He didn't expect that Fu Jiu would get the first question right. The invigilator didn't care much. He treated it as a way to kill time and continued reading. She got the second question right. The third question was also correct. The fourth, the fifth, even the reading questions were correct. The more the invigilator read, the bigger his eyes became. His pupils shook violently, and even his face showed extreme shock and astonishment. All of them were correct. How was this possible? The candidates didn't know what happened to the invigilator, but he suddenly stood up. They thought that he had caught something, so the cheaters were scared out of their wits and immediately pulled their phones back. Who would have thought that the invigilator would just stand there and murmur, "Full marks, this must be a full marks, what full marks?" What was the teacher talking about? The candidates were all dumbfounded. The good thing was that the invigilator was obviously not in the right state today, so they cheated and copied a few more questions. The exam lasted the entire day, from morning to afternoon. This day might have been especially torturous for others, but for Fujio, there was one good thing. She could go in and out of the bathroom freely during the exam. Anyway, she was always the first to teach the test paper. The last exam was physics, which was Fujio's only shortcoming. Compared to the other exams, she was much more serious about this one. The invigilator happened to be the one who taught Fujio and the others physics. She also saw Fujio, but for her, she only cared about the results of those good students, so she didn't pay much attention to the back. When the test papers were handed out, Fujio did the big questions first. She glanced at them and thought in her heart, "Awesome, my brother." All the questions were correctly answered by the Almighty. In the future exams, she would worship the Almighty. This was much more useful than worshipping Buddha. Fujio curled up her lips and started to answer the questions with a carbon pen. The light outside shone on the young man's fair, almost transparent face through the glass. At that moment, one could almost see the tranquil gentleness of time. It was said that serious men were the most handsome. He didn't expect a serious young man to be even more handsome. The girl sitting next to Fujio couldn't help it anymore. After the teacher walked over, she pressed the silent button on her phone and secretly took a photo of His Highness Joe. Fujio answered the questions very quickly, and when it came to the fill-in-the-blank questions, she felt that the knowledge was somehow familiar. An image of a supplementary lesson appeared in his mind. The man held his chin lazily and knocked her head with one hand. Even his voice was elegant and his expression was cold and indifferent. "You can't even remember such a simple formula. I really overestimated your IQ." Every time Fujio thought of the Almighty's face, she felt indignant. She bit her pen and continued writing. In order to prove her intelligence, she had to get it right. Chapter 193. Usually, at this time, Fujio's class wouldn't be over yet. Today, she handed in her test papers early, so she called baby phone. This time, they didn't go to the internet cafe. Instead, they went directly to He Corporation. That's right, He Honghua's company. Since the monthly exams were over, there were only 3 days left before the esports competition. In 3 days' time, they had to decide who would represent them in the competition. Lord Jill was going to take her team members to the company directly. He Honghua wasn't in the company. She had been running around everywhere recently, trying to find members to represent her company in the competition. She didn't know that Fujio had already found them for her and even formed a team. When Fujio walked into the He Corporation, the assistant who answered the phone immediately stood up, and her face instantly turned ugly. How could she look good? Every time this nouveau riche came, he would either smash things or yell at Boss He, throwing a tantrum like a young master. If she had a son like this, she would just strangle him to save her from the annoyance. But to the assistant's surprise, the young man hooked up his lips and smiled at her. His eyes were as bright as stars, and even his breath smelled like sweets. "I brought someone to sign up. Sisterly, please send me a list." The young man didn't stop when he said this. Instead, he put one hand in his pocket, walked forward casually with his long legs, and pushed open the office door. It was as if he was the boss of this company. The youngster, who had walked to the door, seemed to think that his assistant hadn't heard him. He turned around and raised his eyebrows. There was a hint of laughter in his voice, and his questioning tone was indescribably sexy. "Sisterly." The assistant paused and looked at that silver-haired young man again. After meeting his clear eyes, she couldn't help but nod. She must have been poisoned. Feng Shang watched from the side, thinking that another one was electrocuted by her idol. Fujio didn't feel that her behavior was inappropriate at all. She sat down on the boss's chair, crossed her legs, and took the schedule from He Honghua's desk. They were all about the participating players. Fu Jiu could imagine how much effort He Honghua had put into this competition just by looking at the form that had been crossed out over and over again. Everyone knew that He Honghua came from the countryside. What others didn't know was that He Honghua hadn't even gone to school. She had taught herself how to write. The handwriting on the form was even a little round and childish. Fu Jiu touched the form and compared it with the one her assistant had brought over. She raised her hand and wrote down 4 names. "What do you think?" After writing, she tilted her head and asked Feng Shang. Student Fang's eyes lit up. "Good. Qualifier, 4 versus 4, official format." It wasn't until he saw this official registration form that Feng Shang felt that he had truly become a professional team member. "Idol, give our team a name." Fu Jiu raised her eyebrows. "Name? Can I take it?" "N." After Feng Shang nodded, he said in a deep voice, If Idol can't think of a name, I can also think of one. For example, we can call ourselves the Shao Liquor." Fu Jiu. What a strange sense of beauty. Chapter 194. The registration form was submitted electronically, and the system would automatically certify the team member's company. Any company that signed up would be stamped with a red stamp. He Honghua was sitting on the high-speed train back to Jiang City. She was worried about not having enough team members. She even thought about poaching people with money, but those who were good at games and had a bit of fame didn't want to join the He Corporation. Plus, some people were deliberately suppressing them. This made He Honghua unable to move an inch. There were still 3 days before the esports competition, but she didn't even have enough team members. Could she just accept her fate like this? He Honghua picked up her phone and refreshed the company's registration page. What she didn't expect was that when she refreshed the page, a red message popped up on the website. After seeing that message, He Honghua thought that there was something wrong with her eyes. She rubbed them with her chubby hands and looked again. It was still there. The words, He Family Army, seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, under the He Corporation's name, with the company's exclusive red stamp. It was reflected in He Honghua's eyes. He Honghua quickly clicked on that message. The team members were clearly visible. Shui Yao Yao, Feng Shang, Yin Weiyao, Fu Jiu. After seeing the last name, He Honghua's pupils suddenly shook. She checked it several times to make sure that she wasn't mistaken. Moreover, there were photos and identity information of the team members. The young man in the photo was so handsome that he could even outshine the stars. Especially when he curled up his thin lips and looked at the camera, there was a hint of evilness in his eyes. If girls saw that, they would definitely scream uncontrollably. She didn't know why, but He Honghua's eyes were a little moist. Only the website company had the right to see the registration information of each company. This was for the fairness of the competition. The players all participated in the competition with their real names. They would only compete with their in-game names when they arrived at the venue. This was also to set up suspense, so that it could trigger more heated discussions. So He Honghua didn't know that Fu Jiu was Spade Z. She was touched that her Jiu could stand up at this time. Even though her Jiu was a terrible gamer, she was simple in her thinking. As for the other 3, she didn't know where her Jiu found them to make up the numbers. But with this team, at least she still had the qualifications to register, and she wouldn't become a joke in the industry. Thinking of this, He Honghua smiled happily. Anyway, even if she lost, she still had her Jiu. He Honghua looked at her phone and smiled happily. Her eyes looked out of the window. Spade Z hadn't appeared yet, so the outcome was obvious. The students didn't wait for the happy teacher to speak and directly said, "Teacher, just tell us, did someone in our class get full marks this time?" Full marks. The teacher burst into laughter. How is that possible? This is language. Writing a composition will deduct marks. Students, damn, that's right. How could I forget that writing an essay will result in a deduction of marks? However, I'm still very happy. Teacher must praise someone today. The students, "Teacher, did you discuss this beforehand? Can't you change your lines?" Fujo, your composition is so good that I only deducted 1 mark. Students, what's the difference between that and full marks? On the day the results were announced, the students in the inferior classes suffered an unprecedented critical blow. If you admit your mistake this time, the school won't say that they don't want you. They'll give you a chance. Hearing this, Fujo, who had been silent all this time, opened her mouth. Her lips curled up into a cold smile. Admit your mistake this time. What's wrong with me taking a test? Fujo. Chapter 198. Compared to the exasperated teacher, Fujo's attitude was much calmer. She had one hand in her pocket, looking cool and handsome, and her voice was very cold. She only said 2 words to the teacher, tutoring. Tutoring. That physics teacher sneered. I don't know what tricks your mom used to know the content of the exam in advance. The school did not do a good job in this area, but everyone knows that it's impossible to go from knowing nothing to getting full marks in just 7 days. This is simply a fantasy. What kind of tutoring teacher can do that? If there were such tutoring teachers, what would we, the teachers, do for? As soon as the physics teacher finished speaking, the other teachers also sneered. If there were such tutoring teachers, I, Oldly, would resign and let him teach at No. 1 middle school. Exactly. If you want to lie, say something practical. What's the point of a lie that can be seen through so easily? Our school should also investigate who was the one who sold these questions. Our dignified A class didn't even score as much as the last place. Who would believe this? That director wasn't too agitated. After all, last time's incident was too big, and he didn't want to take any more risks or responsibilities. How about this, Fujo, call your parents here first. This matter has to be solved. Fujo's thin lips curled up even more, and she lowered her voice. Solved. How? Are you going to fire all these teachers who slandered me? Fire. That teacher was amused. Fujo, Miss Zhang is here, and she knows your learning situation the best. Fine, you can say that we are slandering you, but are your teachers slandering you too? Ms. Zhang was the physics teacher in Fujo's class. She looked down on Fujo from the bottom of her heart, so when all the teachers came to her, she had no intention of protecting Fujo. She was different from the English teacher, and she didn't believe that Fujo could get full marks. Fujo, you either admit your mistake, or call your parents here. Hearing that, Fujo's eyes narrowed completely. At that moment, her eyes seemed to be overflowing with a dark mist. The phone in her pocket had been vibrating since just now, but she didn't care. The teacher next to her was annoyed. Now, call your mom immediately. Fujo suddenly laughed, and her eyes were cold. You don't have to call my mom for this kind of thing. As she spoke, she took out her phone, pressed the answer button, and put it to her ear. Hello, Brother Mo, where are you? The man's voice sounded like a high-grade red wine that had been frozen in a refrigerator. Even through the phone, one could feel the chill that seeped out from it. Fujo's smile was still there, and she said casually, I was called to the office by the teachers, so I didn't pick up the phone. They insisted that I cheated on the test and asked me to call my parents. I'm still dealing with it, but I'll call you back when I'm done. Sitting in the back seat of the Hummer, Chin Mo's slender fingers paused, and his eyes darkened. He slowly put the documents to the side and said in a low voice, "Which office?" I asked you which office. Fuzhou, H Group office. Wait here. His words were neither cold nor indifferent, and it was impossible to tell whether he was happy or angry. Speaking of this, Chin Mo smiled. That smile was different from the one Fuzhou had seen before. It was truly evil and bloodthirsty. As he spoke, he stretched out his left hand, and the bodyguard behind him immediately handed over a pile of paper. Fuzhou, you're the one who's going to die. Chin Mo put the papers on the table, and his black gloves slid across the table. These are the questions I helped him with these few days. You can all take a look. The moment Chin Mo said, "I am his tutor," the teachers all froze. Now that they saw the clear words on the paper, a layer of cold sweat appeared on their foreheads. Only now did they realize how cold young Master Chin was looking at them. Chapter 200. How could this be? Who would have thought that Fuzhou's tutor was young Master Chin? Regret was not enough to express how the teachers were feeling right now. Their faces were all red, and they wanted to find a hole to hide in. This slap in the face was really embarrassing. Because everyone knew how good Chin Mo was, not because of his family background, but because of his inhuman grades in IQ. Looking at those physics questions that had been suppressed, the great director suddenly remembered that young Master Chin did ask him about the physics course not long ago, and he also mentioned the problem of male and female desk mates. At that time, he always thought that young Master Chin did it for his girlfriend. Now it seemed. Could it be for Fuzhou? Thinking of this, the great director's eyes shook violently. They really screwed up today, and it was very likely that they had wrongly accused someone. The physics teacher in Fuzhou's class wanted to explain for the other teachers. Unfortunately, Almighty Chin was never a person who would give others a chance in this aspect. He took off the black glove on his left hand, lifted his eyelids, and said indifferently, "I heard that the teachers wouldn't let it go until he called his parents over. Since we're done with the tutoring, let's talk about you guys slandering my little brother for cheating." Little brother. Everyone present was shocked again. When did this upstart Fuzhou become young Master Chin's little brother? Every teacher was speechless at that moment, and their throats felt like they were choked by something. Chin Mo raised his good-looking eyebrows. What? You don't want to talk about it? At this point, Chin Mo tilted his head and laughed. His voice was still graceful, but it was bone-chilling. That's not up to you. My little brother is in the rebellious phase of adolescence. Psychologically speaking, this is the time when his mental endurance is at its weakest. As a teacher, if a student gets full marks, you don't praise him, but slander him indiscriminately. This will easily cast a shadow on him. Fuzhou, although she really shouldn't have interrupted at this time. But how did the Almighty know that she was in the rebellious phase of adolescence? Chin Mo didn't look at the young man's eye contact. Even if he did, he would think that the young man was being bullied. This was the first time he came to school as a parent, so of course he couldn't let things develop like this. He continued to say indifferently, directorly, when did the teaching quality of No. 1 middle school fall to this level? As a shareholder, how could I not know? As soon as the year head heard the man call him out, he broke out in a cold sweat. Young Master Chin, this matter, do you want to settle this privately or publicly? Chin Mo didn't wait for him to finish. He glanced at the few teachers standing at the side. They seemed to be well-mannered. However, every teacher knew in their hearts that regardless of whether this matter was settled privately or publicly, they would no longer be able to work in No. 1 middle school. Especially Teacher Zhang, who taught Fujio physics. The blood drained from her face rapidly, and her skin was as pale as a thin piece of paper. Young Master Chin, we just thought that a poor student wouldn't be able to do so well, so we wanted student Fujio to explain herself. We didn't mean to slander her. Chapter 201. Young Master Chin's question was like, do you want your left hand chopped off or your right hand chopped off? No matter which hand he chopped off, it was the same as chopping off the hand. There was no difference. Can't choose. Chin Mo retracted his gaze and said faintly, then there's no need to choose. Teacherly, remove these people's teacher identities and record them in the file. Was this public? The teachers were anxious. Once they were recorded in the file, not only would they not be able to teach at number 1 middle school, they wouldn't even be able to be teachers in the future. Young Master Chin, I choose private. Teacher Zhang's voice also changed. You see, I can satisfy any condition Fujio raises. The nature of this matter doesn't need to be recorded in the file. I misunderstood at the beginning. Teacher Zhang's words sounded like she was admitting her mistake, but in fact, she didn't mean to apologize at all. She just kept repeating that it was a misunderstanding. Oh. You chose private. Chin Mo raised his eyes and glanced in her direction. He raised his voice slightly and said carelessly, then, Teacher Zhang, please be prepared to go through the legal process. As Fujio's parent, I will sue you for slandering and ridiculing a student. Teacher Zhang was dumbfounded. She didn't expect that this was what young Master Chin meant by private. Her parents were both from the bureau. She didn't want to be recorded in the file because once she was recorded in the file, she couldn't be transferred to the administrative department as a teacher. But now, a teacher who had been sued by someone couldn't be a civil servant anymore. This time, Fujio really saw the Almighty's way of teaching people a lesson. It seemed that the Almighty was telling the truth when he said he would give in to her. It felt good to have a big brother to protect her. Thinking of this, Fujio raised her head and smiled at Chin Mo. Chin Mo didn't have time to deal with the youngster. The Almighty wouldn't stop until he finished dealing with him. Since he was the biggest shareholder, he had to have a proper meeting with this kind of problem. At the very least, he had to let some people know that his little brother wasn't someone anyone could bully. When the school leaders heard that young Master Chin was here, they all rushed into the small grade office. Fujio looked at the school leaders who were bald in front of their heads. She felt it was funny and couldn't help but curve her thin lips. Chin Mo took a moment to glance at the youngster. With a cold expression, he took a bag from the bodyguard and threw it to him. Fujio looked down and saw that it was dark chocolate imported from France. She ate it happily. She understood the look in the Almighty's eyes. He wanted her to wait here. Instead, Director Li, who had just been scolded, saw a young Master Chin leading a few school leaders into the big office inside. She sneaked up to Fujio and said in a low voice, well, student Fujio, next week, the school will have a very small parent-teacher conference, and the parents of the top 10 students in the monthly test will be praised. Will young Master Chin attend as your parent? Fujio held the chocolate in her mouth and said casually, probably not. Director Li muttered softly, but young Master Chin seems to really like being a parent. Hearing that, Fujio stopped what she was doing and thought about it. They couldn't help but look at each other, and the scene of young Master Chin attending the parent-teacher conference appeared in their minds at the same time. In the end, Director Li decisively gave up. I will immediately inform the grade to cancel this parent-teacher conference and change it to a letter format. Okay. Fujio also felt that as a school shareholder, the Almighty was indeed not suitable to attend the parent-teacher conference. Chapter 202. The school leaders were now experiencing what it meant to be a cold winter. Chin Mo sat on the leather chair with a calm expression on his face, but every word he said struck them straight in their hearts. The school leaders' hands were shaking when they left. From that day on, the school began to treat all students equally, regardless of whether they were good or bad. They would take care of those who needed to be disciplined, but they wouldn't discriminate against bad students. If any teachers still existed, they would be fired immediately. In the classroom, some students who didn't understand had already left. Only Shui Yaoyao was still waiting. After all, His Highness Zhou's bag was still there, so he would come back sooner or later. She was worried that the physics teacher called His Highness Zhou away. Could it be that there was something wrong with the monthly test? Everyone who participated in the esports competition knew that the results of this monthly test were very important to them. If something happened to His Highness Zhou, then their team, without His Highness Zhou, the He family army, would no longer have any meaning. Shui Yaoyao thought of this and stood up. She wanted to go to the office to have a look. As soon as the wooden door opened, she saw the clean and handsome face of the young man. Shui Yaoyao's eyes lit up. His Highness Zhou, are you okay? The teacher called you. Before she could finish, she saw the man behind the young man and stopped abruptly. Almighty Qin. Why was he here? It wasn't hard to see the surprise on Shui Yaoyao's face. But Fu Jiu just smiled lightly. I'm fine. I came to get my bag. With that, Fu Jiu walked over, casually pulled her left hand, and threw the bag over her shoulder. She still had one hand in her trouser pocket. That posture was always very cool. After all, Shui Yaoyao knew Fu Jiu's gender. She felt a little guilty when she saw Almighty Qin, but after seeing the series of actions of His Highness Zhou, she felt that there was no need to feel guilty. His Highness Zhou's handsomeness was something that others couldn't learn. Almighty Qin probably wouldn't think that His Highness Zhou was a girl. Let's go together. Fu Jiu walked back and touched Shui Yaoyao's head. Brother Mo and I will send you back. She touched her head. Shui Yaoyao blushed. Even though she knew that His Highness Zhou was a girl, she couldn't help but be attracted by that tone. But as soon as she looked up, she saw Almighty Qin's cold and handsome face. His gaze swept over Highness Zhou's hand, and his thin lips seemed to be raised. But Shui Yaoyao felt the coldness in his smile, and her scalp went numb. She immediately said, Your Highness Zhou, you don't have to send me off. I also have an appointment with a classmate to eat ice, so I'll be leaving first. See you later. Almighty Qin's gaze was too terrifying. It was even more terrifying than before. Just because His Highness Zhou touched her head. Moreover, it was the first time they saw such a cold big brother buying candy. All of them couldn't help but look over curiously. Oh no! The little radishes shrunk their heads. The pretty brother he's holding in his hand heard us. Fu Jiu. You guys are speaking so loudly, it's really hard not to be heard. The shop assistant was so embarrassed that he wanted to ask again, Sir. With her beautiful silver hair and perfect nose, she looked much more obedient. Qin Mo held his wallet and glanced sideways at the youngster. He pressed his furry head in satisfaction, his expression still noble and cold. You did well this time, but if I see you touching someone's head again, not only will these lollipops be thrown into the dustbin, no one in the entire Jiang city will sell you even half a lollipop. Do you understand what I mean? Chapter 205. That's what I said. This big brother is even more ruthless than my dad. He won't let anyone sell candy to that pretty big brother. It's so scary. Pretty big brother is so pitiful to be his baby. Yeah, so pitiful. The little radishes nodded in unison. The shop assistant was so embarrassed that she was about to explode. Fujiu took the candy, supported herself with one hand, and jumped in. Her movements were very handsome. She stood there with her long legs and winked at one of the little girls. She bent down and whispered, "Let me tell you a secret. That big brother was drunk. I did all this to make him happy. By the way, look at me, I'm so big. How do I look like his baby? Drunk?" The little radishes gathered together again and looked at Almighty Qin, who was standing outside the shop, as if they were looking at an inhuman being. Qin Mo raised his eyebrows. He didn't hear Fujiu's words, but he knew it was the youngster's doing. He reached out his left hand and dragged the youngster back. That shop assistant watched with her mouth wide open. She was amazed by the silver-haired youngster's skills. So cool. Was he really not a criminal police officer? You don't even let kids off. Qin Mo's voice was very cold. What a flirtatious guy. Fujiu agreed. Brother Mo, don't you think those little radishes are very cute? Qin Mo didn't say anything. He just turned his handsome face sideways and took the youngster to the third floor. Fujiu thought at first that the Almighty finally took her to a more normal floor. The second floor was filled with children's clothing. The third floor was very modern, with all kinds of big brands. But why did the Almighty choose CK of all places? It was all underwear, and it hurt her eyes. Go pick two. Qin Mo raised his eyebrows at Fujiu, looking very indifferent. Fujiu. She was a girl, why would she buy men's underwear? I don't need this. Fujiu raised the candy in her hand handsomely. I'm fine with these rewards. If Almighty Qin could accept rejection, he wouldn't be called Almighty Qin. Go pick. Don't always make yourself look soft and white. Fujiu. Was the Almighty attacking her inner self instead of her grades? What's wrong with white? Fujiu thought that this was a great color, and it should be loved by a germaphobe like the Almighty. Qin Mo glanced sideways, glancing at the youngster. From a psychological point of view, the one at the bottom would like to wear white. Fujiu, in such a situation, the shop assistant was still hesitating whether or not to interrupt. Qin Mo had already raised his slender and fair fingers, pointing at a pair of pure black underwear hanging on the far right. That style, I want one. With that said, he turned sideways and glanced between Fujiu's legs, curling his thin lips into a mocking smile. Give him the smallest size. Yes, sir. The shop assistant felt that the conversation was back to normal and quickly turned around to pack the packaging. Fujiu felt that the way the Almighty looked at her was filled with humiliation towards humanity. I'm medium. The shop assistant paused and turned around, only to see the young man gently smiling at her. Sorry to trouble you, give me a medium size. This. The shop assistant didn't know who to listen to. Qin Mo's expression was indifferent. He didn't say much. Seeing this, the shop assistant naturally sided with the youngster. All right, please wait a moment. Chapter 206. Qin Mo stood there, tall and slender, letting the young man tease his ear. He was dressed in a well-ironed suit, exuding an air of abstinence and indifference. Instead, it was the two girls standing outside who blushed. They really wanted to take pictures of these two handsome guys with their arms around each other's shoulders. Especially the scene of the young man standing on his tiptoes and curling his lips into a smile beside the man's ear. It was so pleasing to the eye that it made people's hearts beat faster. But just as they were about to raise their phones, the man suddenly made a move. He directly grabbed the young man's wrist and pressed him against the fitting room. His tall figure was pressed down, and his waist was elongated. His voice was cold and deep. You want to prove that you're not small? Go in and take off your pants. Big brother will measure it for you. She didn't even have one, so how could she measure it? Fujiu suddenly felt that she was in a dangerous situation. How could she forget that Almighty Qin was drunk today, so she couldn't flirt with him casually? Brother Mo, I was wrong. At this moment, she had to retreat in order to advance. I shouldn't have blown air into your ear. Qin Mo raised his eyebrows and looked at the young man's slightly depressed face. Finally, he let go of his hand and said coldly, "Good that you know." The shop assistant softly said, "Sir, the underwear has been wrapped for you. Is there anything else you two would like? Same style, large size." When Qin Mo said this, he looked in Fujiu's direction again with faint mockery. It was as if he was saying, "Do you think you're not small when you're wearing a medium size?" Fujiu understood that expression. It was a little unnatural, which made her subconsciously want to look at a certain part of the Almighty's body. It was really a little embarrassing. Fujiu hid something in her heart, so when the Almighty asked her what else she wanted, she casually pointed at strangely shaped underwear. When did CK have something like this? And it had a pure black cat tail. Qin Mo also noticed the underwear the young man was pointing at. His eyes paused for a moment, and he said faintly, "I really didn't know that you liked this kind of stuff. But I can't buy it for you. You're still in puberty, and it's not good for your body to wear too tight, not to mention this kind." At this point, Qin Mo frowned as if he was thinking of an adjective. After thinking for a long time, he finally followed his heart. The shop assistant smiled and covered her mouth, as if she was trying to restrain her respect for the customer. This time, Fujiu was really depressed. Shopping with the Almighty had caused her reputation to go down the drain. She had just casually pointed at him. However, the shop assistant didn't seem to think so. When she handed him the shopping bag, she lowered her voice and said gently, "I understand, handsome. Next time, you can secretly buy it yourself. Since you're so handsome, I'll give you a 10% discount." Fujiu. She really didn't want such a discount. She originally thought that she would be depressed all the way with the Almighty, but unexpectedly, the Almighty suddenly changed his attitude. He pointed at a pure white sweater and asked Fujiu to try it on. Fujiu also thought that the sweater was pretty good. It was almost winter, and it was more important to wear warm clothes, so she didn't reject it. The fitting room was, of course, locked. With her previous experience, Fujiu was very insightful in this regard. Chapter 207. The workmanship and material of the sweater were very exquisite. Just by looking at it, it looked very soft. Not to mention the feeling of wearing it, it felt warm and comfortable. That pure snow-like color might be ruined if worn by someone else. But on Fujiu, it only made the young man's snow-white skin and dark eyes look good. In addition to that silver hair and the black ear stud on her porcelain white left ear, she looked up and smiled, and the female shop assistant was stunned. So handsome. As for how handsome she was and how much Fujiu suited the color white, people who hadn't seen it wouldn't know. It was as if she was born to be a clothes hanger. Even if it was a Korean version, it wouldn't drag on her. The sweater didn't have a collar, and it showed off her fair collarbones. But Fujiu had that devilish, bloodthirsty coolness about her, and it made people's hearts beat wildly when they saw it. Qin Mo, who was sitting on the sofa, heard the sound and looked over. When he saw the young man who was tidying his hair with his left hand, his deep eyes couldn't help but sink. Then, he stood up and walked over to Fujiu. His slender fingers moved, and he smoothed the young man's fluffy silver hair. Fujiu looked up, and their eyes met. She smiled at Qin Mo, and it was as bright as the first melting of winter snow. That kind of warmth could be felt even on her fingertips. Qin Mo curled up the corner of his lips, and the girls next to him held their faces one by one like they were infatuated. How can someone be so handsome? A handsome couple. Did you see that? When that handsome guy tidied up the silver-haired young man's hair, my heart almost melted. His smile was so gentle, completely different from before. Don't say any more, my health bar is almost empty. The female shop assistant had been in the shop for a long time, and she had good eyesight. Seeing the man like this, she immediately said, "Actually, we have a bigger size for this sweater. It's very suitable for two brothers to wear together. Sir, would you like to buy one?" Hearing that, Chin Mo raised his good-looking eyebrows. He remembered his conversation with Boss Lee before. The rebellious young man always liked to get more attention. Although he didn't consider wearing a brother outfit, it was still a good way to get closer to him. Okay. Hearing this word, Fu Jiu was somewhat surprised. After all, a person like the Almighty usually wore a suit or a uniform of dark colors. She didn't expect him to accept white. The sweater that Chin Mo wore was completely different from Fu Jiu's. Even though they both looked handsome, Almighty Chin made people feel cold and noble, and the unique design of the wide sleeves made him look like a vampire aristocrat. One slap on the face was enough to make women go crazy. But when the young man was standing beside him, the girls couldn't help but get rid of that thought. Because compared to snatching the man over, she always felt that the two of them looked more sweet. With two equally outstanding people wearing the same clothes, it didn't take long for them to cause a sensation among the girls. Fortunately, Almighty Chin's actions were quick and didn't give the media a chance to take a picture of him. However, Secretary Liang, who had received orders to wait in the car, was completely stunned when he saw the clothes of the two people. What did he see? Love couple outfit. Chapter 208. Of course, Chin Mo also noticed Secretary Liang's gaze, so he glanced at him indifferently. That gaze was extremely cold. Secretary Liang shivered and swallowed the question in his mouth with difficulty. He looked at the shining white sweater in the rearview mirror. There would be an esports interview later. If CEO Chin appeared in front of everyone in this outfit, he would definitely attract a lot of attention. After all, CEO Chin had never dressed like this in front of others. After walking around for so long, Fu Jiu was already hungry. Chin Mo heard the young man's stomach rumble, so he asked someone to buy a bunch of food and threw them all into the young man's arms. "Which one do you want to eat? Pick one." Fu Jiu was not a picky eater, and she loved meat the most. She took a bite of the chicken burger from Burger King. Burgers paired with Coke were the best. Fu Jiu's handsome face puffed up as she ate. Chin Mo frowned. Secretary Liang thought that CEO Chin would teach the young man not to eat in the car and to eat at home. After all, CEO Chin was a clean freak, and everyone in Jiang City knew about it. To his surprise, CEO Chin didn't say anything. Instead, he picked up a tissue and wiped the young man's mouth with disgust. "Go to the Fu house first." "Yes, young master." The driver heard Chin Mo's order and turned the car around. Fu Jiu lifted the corner of her eyes and glanced at the man who was still working on documents. She thought that the Almighty hadn't eaten since just now, so she took out a French fry and put it on his lips. Chin Mo didn't eat this kind of junk food, but the young man was in his rebellious phase, so it was best not to reject him. He opened his mouth and took a bite. It tasted good, so he let the young man do whatever he wanted. Secretary Liang felt like he had been hit the hardest the whole time, until he sent the young man home. His CEO was still warning in a low voice, with his deep and charming eyes. "Stop flirting with people. Take a day off. The esports competition is the day after tomorrow. I'll be on the top floor of the Chin group. Get the uniform and wait for you." "Yes." This was the first time Fu Jiu responded to Chin Mo. Not for anything else, but because she felt that it was a very exciting thing to be teammates with a god. Secretary Liang didn't understand. He couldn't help but look back, thinking, CEO, you don't look like you're teaching your brother. After the Hummer drove away, Fu Jiu walked towards the villa. He Honghua sat at home and didn't know about Fu Jiu's results. She glanced at the registration on the website again, but in her heart, she was thinking that if it really didn't work out, she would voluntarily withdraw from the competition. He Honghua was very clear about their grades. They could barely pass the rest of the exams, but they only scored a little more than 10 points in physics. She had never been to school and did not know what physics was. However, if this name list really appeared on the day of the esports competition and Jiu was unable to participate due to his results, then Jiu would be attacked even more. In the past, He Honghua had also thought about letting the child get better grades, but she firmly believed that there were only so many years in a person's life. Now that Jiu was so obedient, she would let the child do whatever he wanted. To her surprise, before He Honghua could make a decision, her home phone rang. It was a call from the school. Hello, Miss He. I am. Chapter 209. First in the whole grade. He Honghua's face was full of indescribable shock. At that moment, she even suspected that there was something wrong with her ears. The phone was still ringing. Hello. Miss He. Are you still there? Miss He. He Honghua came back to her senses and asked hesitantly, how many Fujios are there in number 1 middle school? Teacher, did you call the wrong number? How could that be? The teacher chuckled. There is only one Fujio in the whole school, and this is his home phone number. He Honghua couldn't hold back her excitement. You mean my Joe really got first in the exam? Of course it's true. The results will be announced in the form of posters in the whole school tomorrow. The most important thing now is his application for the competition. This kind of extracurricular competition usually requires the consent of the parents. I called you this time mainly to talk to Ms. He about this. I agree. He Honghua's face was red, and she was so happy that even her tone changed. As long as the school doesn't have any problems, I will agree with whatever my Jiu does. The teacher knew that He Honghua spoiled her children, but she didn't know who spread this rumor to demonize Fu Jiu's mother. In their eyes, He Honghua became an unreasonable country girl. Not only was she uncultured, but she also thought that whatever their son did was right. This time, after a short phone call, the teacher realized that He Honghua wasn't what she thought she was. Although this middle-aged woman wasn't cultured, she wasn't arrogant. Instead, she was very polite. Even if she spoiled her children, it was only under the school's permission. And who wouldn't spoil a child like Fu Jiu? The teacher was also a mother. She was watching the previous interview when she called. Fu Jiu's short words made her realize that this young man deserved to be spoiled by anyone. Fu Jiu pushed the door open and saw He Honghua's happy face. It was said that women were no different from children when they got older. This was especially true after He Honghua got close to her Jiu. After seeing Fu Jiu, she circled around Fu Jiu like a little girl. Jiu, I got a call from your school. The teacher praised you for a long time and said that I was good at teaching children. Dear Mrs. He, you've always been good at teaching children. Fu Jiu pulled He Honghua over and sat down with a smile. Otherwise, how did I get such an excellent product? He Honghua heard this and smiled even sweeter. Yeah. That was the logic. Chen Xiaodong, who had just walked in, didn't know what was going on. He saw that his young master was coaxing his wife like a girlfriend. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Why did he always feel that after he woke up from the hospital, he became more and more like a monster? The exam papers had just been handed out today.